What Princess Anne just revealed about Princess Diana's jewelry box is shocking. When I opened her jewelry box, this was not what I expected to find. The discovery was insanely shocking. For nearly 3 decades, Diana's secrets were thought to be buried with her. But a hidden room at Kensington Palace has changed everything. Inside, Princess Anne discovered an ornate jewelry box, heavy and strange, engraved with a haunting message. For those who dare seek truth, DS. What began as a duty to catalog belongings turned into a chilling revelation of letters, codes, and evidence Diana left behind. Could this jewelry box finally expose the truth about the people's princess and the forces that silenced her? The hidden room at Kensington Palace. It began with something ordinary. In the spring of 2024, renovation crews were sent into one of the quieter wings of Kensington Palace, a section rarely visited and long overdue for repairs. Their job was simple: reinforce aging walls, check the wiring, and make sure the space was fit for use. But while pulling away wooden panels along a corridor, they uncovered something no one expected. Behind the wall was a sealed doorway, its edges hidden under layers of plaster and paint. When they finally broke through, the air that escaped was stale, carrying with it a silence untouched for nearly 3 decades. They had stepped into a hidden chamber, locked away since the final days of Princess Diana. Inside, the room felt frozen in time. Dust covered everything, clinging to the air like a veil. Elegant evening gowns hung from racks, their fabrics dulled but still shimmering faintly beneath the grime. Boxes of handwritten notes sat stacked against the walls, some tied with faded ribbons, others left open as if waiting to be read. Framed photographs of Diana and her sons, William and Harry, rested on a dresser, their smiles forever young, forever untouched by the tragedy that followed. It was a chamber of memories, personal and raw, as though Diana herself had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. When news of the discovery reached Buckingham Palace, there was no hesitation about who should be called. Princess Anne, known for her discipline and discretion, was summoned to oversee the cataloging of the room. She had always distanced herself from the drama that surrounded her sister-in-law, but duty left her no choice. Stepping into the chamber, Anne was struck by the stillness. For a woman who had once lived under the constant flash of cameras, this room felt heartbreakingly private. Every item spoke of the life Diana had carried away from the public eye: quiet notes, mementos, and keepsakes that told a softer story than the tabloids ever did. Among the countless belongings, one item stood out to Anne immediately. Tucked behind a stack of scarves on the far shelf was a box unlike anything else in the room. It was an ornate jewelry case, carved from deep rosewood, with delicate inlays of pearl and sapphire that caught the dim light. Even under a layer of dust, it seemed to glow, commanding attention. Anne picked it up carefully, surprised by its weight. It felt heavier than a jewelry box should, as though it carried something more than gold and gems. Turning it over in her gloved hands, she studied the fine craftsmanship, the way every curve and line had been designed with care. Then her eyes caught something that made her pause. Etched faintly into the base of the lid was an inscription, small and easily missed if you weren't looking closely. It read, "For those who dare seek truth, DS." The initials were unmistakable. Diana Spencer. Not Princess of Wales. Not a royal title. Just her own name, raw and personal. The words seemed to whisper from the wood itself, daring anyone who held it to open it and uncover what lay inside. Anne felt a ripple of unease. This was no ordinary heirloom, no glittering trinket meant for display. It was personal, secretive, almost defiant. The choice to use her maiden name made it clear that this was Diana speaking as herself, not as part of the crown. For Anne, who had often dismissed Diana as emotional and unpredictable, the message landed differently now. Holding that box, she realized she might be standing at the edge of a truth long buried, one that Diana had wanted someone, anyone brave enough, to one day discover. The box opens. Princess Anne sat alone that evening, the jewelry box resting on a velvet cloth before her. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should. For years, Anne had lived by duty, by order, by rules that kept the royal family standing. But as her eyes lingered on the inscription, "For those who dare seek truth, DS," she felt the weight of something else entirely. This wasn't duty. This was a call from the grave. With steady hands, she lifted the lid. At first glance, what she saw took her breath away. Inside was a collection of jewels unlike anything she had seen in the royal inventories. Earrings of rare Burmese rubies, a sapphire bracelet that shimmered with a glow like midnight stars, an emerald pendant that seemed almost alive with color. Each piece sparkled as if it had been waiting to be found. But the beauty was only the surface. The longer Anne looked, the more she realized something was strange. On the back of each item were tiny markings, symbols, numbers, and letters so faint they could have been missed by anyone in a hurry. Anne leaned closer, her brow furrowing. One piece carried what looked like a string of numbers, almost like a bank code. Another held what resembled coordinates, digits etched with care so small they nearly disappeared under the metal. A brooch bore initials she didn't recognize, and a bracelet carried a date that didn't connect to any family records. These weren't decorations. They were messages, hidden in plain sight. Anne's breath caught as she picked up the emerald pendant again. Turning it over, she saw a small engraving that looked like an international account number, the kind used for offshore banking. Her mind raced. Could Diana have known about secret funds? About money moving in places it shouldn't? The thought unsettled her. This was not the sentimental keepsake of a grieving princess. This was evidence, encoded carefully into jewels that were never meant to be part of any public collection. Her fingers moved instinctively to the box itself. The wood was smooth, heavy, too deliberate in its design. She ran her thumb along the edges, pressing against the grooves as if testing the craftsmanship. Then it happened. A soft click, faint but undeniable. The bottom panel shifted slightly under her touch. Anne froze. Holding her breath, she slid the false base open, revealing what had been hidden all these years. Inside was a small compartment, tightly packed. At the top lay a bundle of handwritten letters, tied with a pale blue ribbon. The paper was faded, the ink slightly smudged, but Diana's elegant script was unmistakable. Beneath them were photographs, grainy but clear enough to show Diana herself, disguised, meeting with strangers in places no royal was ever supposed to be. Underground garages, private homes, tucked-away cafes. None of it matched the life the world believed she lived. And then came the final piece. A small silver key, attached to a tag that read, Zurich Deposit Box, 837L. Anne sat back, her pulse quickening. The jewels had been a distraction, a way to hide the true purpose of the box. Diana had left behind a trail of breadcrumbs, and now Anne was holding the first map. She reached for the letters, and as she did, one envelope caught her eye. Her own name was written on it, in Diana's looping script. The date in the corner was enough to send a chill through her spine. August 28th, 1997. Just 3 days before Paris. Diana's last letters. Anne hesitated before untying the pale blue ribbon. Her fingers, always so steady during official duties, trembled slightly now. The first letter was addressed to her directly, the ink unmistakably Diana's. The date marked only 3 days before the crash in Paris. That alone was enough to make her chest tighten. She unfolded the paper carefully, as though afraid the words themselves might shatter under her touch. The opening line made her heart lurch. "If you are reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me." Anne stared at the words, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a sentimental farewell. It was a warning. The sentences that followed spoke of danger Diana felt closing in, of people watching her every move, of shadows that grew darker the more questions she asked. For a woman so often dismissed as dramatic or fragile, the tone here was nothing of the sort. It was focused, deliberate, almost like a manifesto written in fear, but anchored in truth. She set the first letter aside, only to find more beneath it. Each envelope contained fragments of a secret life Diana had been living in the months before her death. One spoke of money trails hidden inside charities, funds disappearing into offshore accounts. Another described journalists she had met in secrecy, brave enough to listen when others had turned her away. There were notes about surveillance, cars she didn't trust, and conversations she believed were being recorded. Anne's eyes moved over the pages slowly, the reality of what she was reading pressing down heavier with each line. The photographs beneath the letters only deepened the unease. Diana, wearing disguises, sitting across from men and women whose faces Anne didn't recognize. Some photos looked like they were taken in dim cafes, others in underground parking garages. These weren't staged press appearances. They were clandestine meetings. The expressions on Diana's face were serious, sometimes tired, but always determined. She had been chasing something, and whatever it was, she had known it could cost her everything. Then Anne picked up the small silver key again. Its tag read, simply, Zurich Deposit Box, 837L. The connection was undeniable. The jewels had carried codes, the letters had carried warnings, and now this key pointed to something larger, something Diana had wanted to keep safe outside the reach of British soil. Anne's pulse quickened. Whatever was in that deposit box wasn't just personal. It was the kind of evidence people risk their lives to protect. For a long while, Anne sat in silence. The letters spread before her like fragments of a puzzle. She had once thought of Diana as too emotional, too unpredictable. But these pages showed a different woman entirely. Calculated, aware, documenting everything because she knew her time was running short. It dawned on Anne that Diana hadn't been paranoid at all. She had been right, and now the burden of proof rested in Anne's hands. The jewelry box was no longer just a relic. It was a vault of warnings. And as Anne closed her eyes for a moment, clutching the key tightly, she realized Diana hadn't left these things to be hidden forever. She had left them to be found, to be acted upon. The question was no longer whether Diana had been silenced. It was how far Anne was willing to go to finish what she had started. The Swiss connection. The decision weighed on Anne for days, though deep down she knew hesitation was dangerous. The letters were clear, the photographs undeniable, and the key in her possession felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. In the end, she did what Diana must have hoped someone would. She followed the trail. Quietly, without fanfare, Anne boarded a private jet under a false itinerary. Her security detail was stripped down to only those she trusted implicitly. The destination was Zurich, the city Diana had pointed to in her final message. When Anne walked into the centuries-old Swiss bank, she felt the sterile chill of a place built on secrecy. The clerk barely looked at her as she presented the tag marked 837L in the silver key. There were no questions asked, no small talk, just a nod of recognition and a slow procession through layer after layer of security doors. At last, Anne was left alone in a stark viewing room, the small steel box placed carefully before her. For a moment, she stared at it, her pulse steady but heavy, as though she knew the world might never be the same once it was opened. Inside, the contents were far from ordinary. Stacks of documents filled the box, neatly organized into folders labeled in Diana's handwriting. There were financial ledgers with highlighted transfers, receipts from charities, and detailed notes on accounts moving through offshore banks. Each file painted the picture of money flowing in directions it was never meant to go. Funds for children's hospitals, landmine victims, and shelters being siphoned into private accounts tied to powerful figures. Names appeared in the margins, some familiar, others hidden behind corporations and foundations. And then came the tapes. At the bottom of the box, tucked neatly beside the folders, were video recordings. One was labeled in Diana's careful script. "If I disappear." Anne inserted it into the provided player, her hands steady but her heart racing. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Diana, seated in what looked like a modest flat, her face bare, her eyes tired yet sharp. She spoke calmly, directly, as though she knew this moment would one day come. "If you are watching this, then I have been silenced," Diana said. Her voice was steady, almost defiant. She began to lay out what she had uncovered: charities used as fronts for laundering money, connections between businessmen and members of the aristocracy, and a pattern of corruption that stretched across borders. She spoke of threats, of cars she feared were tampered with, of people following her in shadows. And then, with tears brimming in her eyes, she spoke of William and Harry. "I must leave them something more than fairy tales," she whispered. "They need the truth." Anne sat frozen as the screen went dark. She had walked into that room expecting family heirlooms, or perhaps sentimental writings, but what she found was far larger, far more dangerous. This was not paranoia. This was evidence. And the fact that Diana had hidden it in a Swiss bank proved she knew exactly how high the stakes were. The surveillance begins. Anne returned to London with the documents secured, but the sense of unease followed her like a shadow. From the moment her plane touched down at Heathrow, she noticed the changes. A black car idling too long outside her residence. Calls on her private line echoing strangely, as if another ear was listening in. Arriving torn at the edges, resealed with a precision that felt anything but accidental. For someone who had lived under scrutiny her entire life, Anne knew the difference between coincidence and surveillance. This was deliberate. The first real warning came in her garage. One morning, as her driver prepared the car, it refused to start. Mechanics were called, and their conclusion was delivered with casual certainty: rodent damage to the brake line. But Anne wasn't fooled. She had spent enough years dealing with official reports to know when the truth was being dressed up. The discovery only confirmed what she already suspected. Someone had marked her, just as they had marked Diana. Unwilling to rely on palace staff, Anne reached out to an old friend, a retired intelligence officer who had once quietly aided Diana during her most difficult years. He arrived without fanfare and spent hours combing through her residence. The results chilled them both. Hidden microphones tucked behind her study's bookshelf. Malware traced on her personal phone. Tracking software buried deep within her communication system. Whoever was watching wasn't just curious. They were close, organized, and determined. And then came the message that stripped away any illusion of safety. Slipped under her door, late one night, was a plain envelope with no seal, no sender, just a single line scrawled in sharp ink. "Stop digging or join her." Anne read it twice, her hands steady even as her chest tightened. It was the same silence Diana had faced, the same warning dressed as inevitability. But what her pursuers did not understand was that fear had never dictated Anne's choices. The weight of what she carried grew heavier by the day. The files from Zurich were too detailed to ignore, the videotapes too damning to dismiss. She knew she could not go through this alone. That was when a new name entered the story: Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's former private secretary. A mysterious package arrived at Anne's residence, containing nothing more than his name and an address outside Bath. He had vanished from public life after Diana's death, his silence as telling as it was unsettling. Curiosity and duty pushed Anne forward. She agreed to meet him under the cover of night, in a quiet chapel lit only by flickering candles. His face, older and lined with years of secrecy, betrayed the same weight she now felt pressing on her shoulders. "Your sister-in-law was not alone," he told her without hesitation. "There were others helping her. She trusted a few of us, those with no ties to the machine. We've been waiting for someone brave enough to carry the flame." Anne listened in silence as he spoke of the holes in the official investigation, the missing CCTV footage, the unexplained disappearance of witnesses, and the carefully ignored reports of the white Fiat that had haunted the Paris crash scene. "It was never meant to be solved," Timothy explained. "It was meant to be closed." For the first time, Anne realized the scale of the truth Diana had uncovered, and the danger of holding it in her hands. The betrayal from within, the deeper. Anne dug, the more the weight of betrayal pressed down on her shoulders. The evidence she had carried back from Zurich was damning enough: ledgers, photographs, tapes. But what unsettled her most were the names. At first, she expected to see businessmen, faceless investors, and international brokers. They were there, yes, but threaded among them were connections that struck far closer to home. Transactions authorized by figures tied directly to the palace. Meetings cross-referenced with royal itineraries. It wasn't just outsiders who had circled Diana. It was people inside the very walls she thought were safe. One folder stood out among the files. Labeled in Diana's careful handwriting was Operation Marionette. The papers inside carried chilling details: correspondence between foreign operatives and a private security firm, coded instructions about movements, and one line that froze Anne where she sat. "Ensure containment before Paris trip. Risk elevated." Her pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't rumor or paranoia. This was planning. As Anne pieced the fragments together, her stomach turned. Diana had trusted some of these people. She had sat beside them at banquets, smiled at them in photographs, defended them in interviews. And yet, behind closed doors, they were part of the machinery that sought to silence her. It wasn't just betrayal. It was treachery of the most intimate kind, woven into the very fabric of the monarchy. She reached for the phone and dialed Timothy Radcliffe again. His voice, low and weary, confirmed her fears. Diana had been working with journalists on a report that would have torn the veil away, an exposé connecting palace insiders with corrupt foundations and offshore accounts. But the report never surfaced. The journalist she trusted most was found dead only weeks after Paris, his death chalked up to an overdose. Another name crossed out, another case quietly closed. The photographs in Diana's hidden files offered no comfort. There she was, disguised in a headscarf, meeting strangers in unmarked cafes, her eyes sharp, determined. She must have known the walls were closing in, yet she pressed forward, leaving behind clues in jewels, letters, and secret vaults. She had seen what no one else dared to see, and she had paid for it. Anne sat back in her chair, her breath unsteady. For the first time in her life, she felt the sharp sting of guilt. She had misjudged Diana, turned away when she should have listened, stood silent when she should have asked questions. The betrayal Diana suffered wasn't only from those who plotted against her, it was also from those who refused to believe her. And as Anne stared at the words, "ensure containment," she realized the cost of silence had been far too high. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.